Okay, welcome back to part two, and let's continue on with the latest recap of the second New York Times attempt at covering their butt, or covering the butts of the deep staters who probably wrote this piece. Let's continue. So, the New York Times admits in this article that Halper raised the issue with Papadopoulos over dinner about the hacked emails and Russia interfering in the election. They admit this in the story, that it was Halper who took the issue up with Papadopoulos over dinner. So he invites Papadopoulos over to London to have dinner and talk about, and have some meetings and talk about the dispute over oil and gas issues in the Mediterranean. But now they're having dinner, and Mr. Halper begins to pepper Papadopoulos about the Hillary Clinton hacked emails and the Russia interfering in the election. At which point, Papadopoulos said that he had no knowledge. And this, according to the New York Times, this clearly annoyed the informant, meaning Mr. Halper. Why? Well, because he knew that Mr. Misfit had already informed Papadopoulos about the Russian involvement and Russians having hacked emails. So Halper invites Papadopoulos over on the given the reason that, hey, we want you to come over to London and write this paper about the dispute going on with the oil and gas in the Mediterranean, and we'll have some meetings, we'll have some dinner. So then when Papadopoulos gets there, they're having dinner, Halper starts peppering him about the hacked emails and the Russians interfering in the election, at which point Papadopoulos is like, I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, and this makes Halper mad. Why is Halper mad? Because he knows that Papadopoulos has been told that the Russians have hacked emails. How would he know that? How would he know that? Well, we've been told that Papadopoulos learned that from Mr. Misfit, who is suspected to be a British agent who went underground in November, at the end of November, after he was outed as being the source for Papadopoulos. So clearly, Mr. Halper knew that Misfit had told Papadopoulos, and what was supposed to happen is that Papadopoulos was supposed to start talking and start saying, oh yeah, I met this Russian professor, and he was telling me all about that, and at which point Papadopoulos would have been on record, because we know that Papadopoulos suggested that he thought that Mr. Halper may have been recording their conversation, which is probably why Papadopoulos got a little nervous and thought, I better not talk about any of this. I think this dude's something going on. He smelled a rat. Something was weird about this whole situation, and so he just didn't feel comfortable talking about it, and didn't. And this really ticked off Mr. Halper. And when Papadopoulos played dumb and wouldn't cooperate and talk about this, Mr. Halper excused himself from the table, at which point, after dinner, Papadopoulos and this apparently attractive and sexy Turkish woman, who's Halper's assistant, who stayed with Papadopoulos after Halper left, they went over and had some drinks. And while having drinks, this Turkish woman, assistant to Mr. Halper, began flirting with Papadopoulos and trying to get him to talk about what he knew about the Russians hacking the election and having these emails. This is the Boris and Natasha technique from the old Saturday morning Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons. Isn't that exactly what Boris and Natasha would do? They would have Natasha do the sexy act with the guy and get them to give up information. I mean, as Mr. Halper, was he a big fan of Rocky and Bullwinkle? He's using the Rocky and Bullwinkle technique, the Boris and Natasha play on Papadopoulos. And maybe, who, for all we know, Papadopoulos was a big fan of Rocky and Bullwinkle and probably thought, haven't I seen this before in a cartoon? Yeah, the Bullwinkle cartoon. The Boris and Natasha thing. They're running the Boris and Natasha routine on me. I think I'll shut the hell up. Something ain't right. And he says when he was interviewed, it's in his statements that he thought something was strange and unusual and weird about this whole thing, the way it was all going down. But clearly, Mr. Halper was working with Mr. Misfit, and he probably got together with Mr. Misfit at some point, who's also British intelligence. They're both connected to Haklud, that cloak and dagger intelligence agency. They're both connected at Cambridge, this Cambridge university project that they do. Both Misfit and Halper and Downer, and of course they welcomed Papagalopoulos in and made him part of that as well. He was welcomed into the family. And they're all connected. So likely it was a tag team effort between Downer, Misfit, and Halper. They were going to set a trap for Papagalopoulos. Halper was told, Misfit, here's what you need to do. Tell Papagalopoulos that you know about Russians hacking the emails and having Hillary's emails and hacking the election, blah, blah, blah. Go ahead and tell him that. Get him going on that. And then I'm going to have him sit down with Downer, and I'm going to have Mr. Downer ask him about it and get Papagalopoulos talking, and then I'm going to be the second source to back it up. I'm going to go in and talk to Papagalopoulos and say, yeah, I was talking to my friend Mr. Downer. He said you talked about this and this and this. The whole time he's got a tape recorder running, getting Papagalopoulos on tape. This is exactly what they were doing. Total setup. So, that did not work out because Papagalopoulos did not bite. He became suspicious and essentially just didn't give him the information they wanted. Even though Misfit had told him that, he wasn't going to come off of it. Something was obviously not right. He figured that out and thought, someone's running the game on me, and he probably figured it out. He's not that stupid. So, next thing they do, they move on to Carter Page. Of course, keep in mind that Carter Page had worked for the FBI as an informant to help them take down a Russian gangster named Eugeny Burkarov in a case that had ended with his conviction and others just 5 months earlier. Just 5 months earlier, Carter Page successfully helped the FBI as an undercover informant take down a Russian mobster and some of his buddies. But now, just 5 months after that, after he helps the FBI as an inside informant to take down a Russian mobster, they suspect that he's actually a foreign agent, an American working as a foreign agent for a foreign government, in this case Russia. He goes from being a hero, working undercover, helping the FBI, to being public enemy number one and a target for being a traitor. Unbelievable. So now he's a suspect in a Russian plot, or at least enough to get a Title I FISA warrant. And keep in mind, the standard to get a Title I FISA warrant is that the target must be a possible agent of a hostile foreign government. But Page, like Papagalopoulos, did not bite. So we have two targets, neither one of them bite. But the operation has already been launched without probable cause. They launched the counterintelligence operation and said, uh-oh, now we got this going. Now we got to justify it. Okay, well, we got these two guys. We're all ready. We got the setup ready. It'll go down here in the next couple days. And that's when they send Strzok and Page and the other two over there, and they probably get on the same sheet of music. They get their insurance policy planned together, and then they begin the operation. Halper sends the email, brings Papadopoulos over to set him up. When that fails, they start to work on Carter Page. Both fail. They don't get what they want. But that doesn't matter. They get 3 more extensions on the Title I FISA warrant anyway. And what's it based on? The dossier. The unverified, salacious dossier paid for by the rotten Reverend Clinton. Whew, hard to believe. Absolutely hard to believe. And this is what the facts are going to bear out. Their entire Papadopoulos, Carter Page, Paul Manafort, you can throw all these guys out there all day long if you want. You can do all you want to do. But the bottom line is when we get to the bottom of this, the only thing they're going to find to justify halfway justify what they did is the dossier. It's what we used to get the FISA warrants, and it was the predicate by which everything else was set in motion. This whole Papadopoulos thing, and Carter Page, all had to happen after the fact, because they realized, Hillary might lose. Hillary might lose. We better have a plan just in case Hillary loses. And so here's the plan. And Peter Ben Strokens goes over to London, meets with their boy Mr. Halper, probably of course Mr. Downer for sure, probably Mr. Halper, and they put their plot together. Again, everything they do all throughout this, as we've been covering this, is they do the criminal act first, and then they figure out what they need to do to have cover for what they already did later. They're always doing the criminal act first, and then having to put together something to cover what they did after the fact. It's all through this entire process, which is another reason why it ain't going to fly. None of this stuff is going to fly. So Halper had also had contact with Michael Flynn. They met in 2014 when Flynn attended an intelligence seminar. Where? Cambridge University. It's almost like the place where they bring their targets in to set them up. Because that's where it's all centering around, is all these people who belong to this sort of group that all operated out of this little operation at Cambridge University, which was clearly nothing more than a intelligence front operation. It's not a real think tank policy place. They don't really, everything they do there is not really about, writing policy papers and stuff. They do. They write policy papers. They get involved in various diplomatic things, but it's all a cover for what they actually do there at Cambridge. Probably working with people like Christopher Steele, British intelligence, American intelligence, probably Hacklood, and all these people, because they're all connected here. And let's not forget also that at this... another thing we've recently learned is, I told you yesterday that 4 days after Carter Page gives his speech in Russia, that's when Halper invites Carter Page to go to Cambridge University and to hear these speeches. And one of the persons speaking, one of the 5 speakers, was Madeleine Halfbright. But I just learned this morning that the person who's behind sponsoring that event that day, Mr. Halper. He put the event together, invited his good friend Madeleine Halfbright and 4 other deep staters to give speeches, and invited Mr. Page over so that he could do the same thing to him that he tried to do to Papadopoulos. But Carter Page, he did not bite either. So at that event in 2014 that we're talking about now, we're going now back to 2014 when Halper first met Michael Flynn. So back in 2014, Michael Flynn attended a seminar there at Cambridge University. And at that event, some source other than Mr. Halper, apparently, became alarmed that Flynn seemed to be having a certain closeness with a Russian woman. Really? So a source back in 2014 observed Flynn being a little close to a Russian woman. I don't know, maybe she was really attractive. Maybe she was a spy. Maybe Michael Flynn was having a little fun with some Russian woman. Maybe she was just some person he knew. Who knows? Just because you're having a conversation with a Russian person at an open forum like this, where there's probably lots of other people from other places around the world, doesn't necessarily mean you have probable cause for a criminal investigation. But for whatever reason, someone there observed this and reported it to the American authorities. That was back in 2014, and somehow Mr. Halper knew about it. Mr. Halper knew that some source had contacted the U.S. government back in 2014 and said, hey, I was at Cambridge at a speech, at a seminar, and one of your generals, 3-star generals, Michael Flynn, was awfully close to a Russian woman. Yeah, maybe he was trying to get a little action. I mean, let's face it. I mean, come on. What can you say? It doesn't mean he was acting as a, foreign spy or a traitor. I mean, it's a very, very, very wide stretch. So anyway, that is some new stuff that we've learned. But I guess a question I would ask is if they suspected that this Russian woman was somehow a Russian spy or somehow someone who Flynn shouldn't have been having conversations with or being close to, if she's this person of a questionable nature or character, then what the hell is she doing there? Who invited her? Certainly, the people there at Cambridge University at this spy function, they invite the people there. I'm sure it's by invitation only. Who invited her? I wonder if that source did any investigation to find out who that Russian woman was, who invited her, why she was invited, what was the motive there. Keep in mind, in 2014, Michael Flynn was taking policy positions that were quite opposed to the Obama administration and the deep state on Ukraine and Russia. He was probably targeted back in 2014. If the truth is known and if the truth comes out, that's what I think we're going to learn. The story, this particular story, just like the first story, this story is bad as the previous one. If this is all that they've got, then they're in deep trouble. All that they have done, still not a shred of verifiable evidence of a plot. No reasonable suspicion. No probable cause that a crime was committed. Yet, they got a Title I FISA. That means the works. It was renewed 3 times. They have a private contractor, at least one source, agent provocateur, inside the campaign. They have private contractors accessing the FBI NSA database, and that began back in the fall of 2015. And they have the dossier. That's what they've got. And that dossier paid for by the rotten Reverend Clinton. Put together by a foreign national, Christopher Steele, which is a violation of the FEC laws, with help from his friends in the FBI, in the DOJ NSD, the State Department, friends of rotten Reverend Clinton, and other dubious characters. My friends, the deep state is in a world of trouble if this is all they've got. If these 2 stories from the New York Times, actually not from the New York Times, they published it, but I'm telling you someone else wrote these stories. If the defense that they've made, in the case that they've made in these last 2 articles of the New York Times, I know they need to get out ahead of the IG report. I don't know if Mr. Huber has indictments coming down. I don't know. They probably do know. They probably had that leaked to them from their friends who are still on the inside. But I can tell you, just from the last 2 articles, if this is all they've got, then they are in a world of hurt. Because I'm absolutely convinced that we are going to find that Mr. Halper was involved long before July 31st of 2016. He was in the game long before that. And that's just one piece of it. But we're going to also be getting in the IG report. The IG report is going to have in there about these private contractors accessing the database. That went back to 2015, the fall 2015. How are they going to explain that? Why were they giving private contractors access to the NSA database, FBI NSA database, in the fall of 2015? If, in fact, they didn't even begin their investigation or even know about any of this until late July of 2016. What's their excuse for that? They still have not explained how they were able to use the dossier to get those FISA warrants. As far as we know at this point, there's not a single word in there about Papadopoulos. Not a word, as far as we know. I guess we'll learn more once the IG report comes out, because he's obviously looked at the FISA application and probably the arguments that were made or what have you. He probably knows. So this stuff is all coming out, and all they're trying to do is get out ahead of it and limit the political liability. And you can see certain people are trying to circle the wagons and cover their six while pointing the fingers at what appears to be who they're going to scapegoat, appears to be the counterintelligence division of the FBI, which would have been Strzok, Page, and the other 6 or 8 people, a couple people over at the DOJ. And it looks like the... But again, we also have issues with Clapper. We have the lying. We have the leaking. We have a lot of things, other things going on around it. But ultimately, now that we have Mr. Halper, now we know why they fought so hard for so long to keep this information out of Devin Nunes' hands. Because they knew that once he learned that they had an informant on the inside, at least one, and they learned who the informant was and who the contacts were that who he had contact with, then Devin Nunes was going to put all this together. Mr. Halper is the key to this. When did he become involved? Who all did he speak to? Was he setting these people up? These are all the things that are going to be pulled out of him when he finds himself being interviewed or testifying in front of a grand jury. That's why they probably had to give him a week to get his affairs together so that he could disappear. But ultimately, if they want to talk to Mr. Halper, they will find him. And something tells me they will. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow on Monday, and we will see what the fallout is. By Monday, we'll see what the fallout is from the revelations that Mr. Halper was the agent provocateur. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be back with you on Monday. See you.